Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. When you start on the first morning, it's the first paper up. You know that everybody's fired up, so take it easy on me. They informed me late last week that they'd like somebody to just introduce Module 4, which is the drainage module in the new subdivisional guidelines. It is a generic document, and those of you that have downloaded it or have a copy of it, you'll know there's no way in about 20 minutes I'm going to be able to cover what's actually in there. So I want to give you a general overview because there are some changes. There's some things that have been put in lately. There are some possible, as I call it, criteria with the state planning, WAPC, that I think you need to know about. So I won't get into the technicalities this morning. We have those of you that are staying stormwater all day. You'll get the experts and you'll get the calculations and a lot of other things. I may say a few things here that you think are controversial. When I finished, I've got to leave and go to where I'm working at the moment, so you won't be able to chop me up at morning tea. But I will say some things probably that you'll sit back and think, whoa, how can he say that? Just have a think about them, take them away, and I think after a period of time you'll find that I haven't really said things that are that controversial. The thing that I will say to you with the IPWEA guidelines, they are generic, they are a basis, and they were originally put out to give young technocrats and less experienced technocrats a base document to work from. Stormwater, have a look at the East Coast. They go to plenty of stormwater. I'm one of the optimists of the world. If they're having the big storms these two summers, my feeling is it's only a matter of time till Western Australia gets theirs. So if you think we're in the dry corner, we're never going to have anything, climate change or no climate change, I think you'll find sooner or later one of those storms will hit. Those of you, most of you look a lot younger than me, but I'm one of the people that remembers Cyclone Alby going right down past Bunbury. And trust me, we got some rain. So don't think it's just all dry, you don't have to consider stormwater. I just want to revisit a little bit of information on the guidelines. It was put out initially in 1998 and late 2007, 2008, the WAPC decided that they needed something for their agency and SAT to look at when appeals were on. So that was what prompted it. Those of you, and you've probably heard me say it before, most of us are technocrats, most of us are engineers, and the day they put out the new Planning Act, we were asleep. Because all the subdivisional guidelines and all the subdivisional laws are now in the Planning Act. They're not in the Local Government Act. Now, my personal opinion is we missed an opportunity to have them maintained under the Local Government Act. There are odd things in there, but it's all under the Planning Act, and you need to understand you need to talk to your planners now. This is not a situation where you would turn around and say, oh, I'm the engineer, I'm the technocrat, I'll do this. No, you won't. You have to go and talk to your planners. You've got to get these things in major planning documents. There's an industry out there. You're talking the development industry. They can't stand going from local authority to local authority and every curb type changes, every street sign changes, every drainage policy changes. They are saying, and they have the government's ear. Don't kid yourself that you're a little person on your own and you'll dictate to them. The government at the highest level is listening to the development industry. Now, you need to get your voice heard, but you need to be realistic. So think about that. And I've had one council tell me there's only one way to build a road, and that's the way it's going to be, and that's 200 limestone, 40 mil thick lift, and 25 on top. That's it. And yet we've been building roads with, 150, 200 limestone, 75 road base, primer seal, 25 on top. Been building them for decades, and they're not all falling apart. You know, that sort of thinking, when it gets to SAT, is going to cause that local authority a lot of problems. So just keep that in mind. The funding assistance program that the guidelines were done under, yeah, turn them on silent. I never ask you to turn them off, just turn them on silent. Expired in June, and that's why it was around 2008, 2009 that we rewrote it. DPI actually approached IPWEA and said, look, it's time a 1998 document was upgraded, and I think that's a good idea. It's being done and it's been revised and it's in its second revision, and I'll explain that later. It's debatable how it's going to go, but some of these things like, clarity, in other words, what SAT can sit down, you've got to understand. Has anybody been to SAT? There's a judge sitting over it. SAT's not just somebody from somewhere. That is a legal judge that generally sits over it. So if you've dealt with the law recently or years ago, they don't care about operations. What is the technicality in what you wrote? That's what they're about. To talk to you, if you've got mates who are lawyers, have a talk to them, they'll tell you. So you're not going to get any, what we as technocrats would term logic, you're going to get the legal technicality. And when you look at the document, and Bill Till's talking today, he's involved with a lot of policy from the Department of Water, has to be approved, otherwise it can't go in this document. Because if it gets challenged at SAT, the first thing the judge is going to say, is this an approved policy? So you need to make yourself aware. Transparency, source of engineering requirements. We've all got Australian standards. That's fantastic. If you're not going to use them or you're going to bend them, please document it. Why you didn't consider a rainfall interval. Why you've used something else. Doesn't matter whether you're necessarily right or wrong, but at least if you document your tracks, and those of you who've done any project management, guess what? You keep every email, your files like this, to cover everything you do. And that's the only little bit of advice there. It is fair to say, how many of you got kids headed to want to buy a house? We got to make subdivisions cheaper. Now, people will say, the development industry, they'll just pocket the extra money. Well, that's a naive way of looking at it. I was accused of that because that was my first reaction. If I make the developer another $1 million, he's going to go, you beauty, in the pocket, and I made another $1 million. They're saying no, market forces will determine what the price is. And if a market force is not high enough, they won't develop. Simple as that. So it's the market that will do that. But they are saying to us, please have a look. Please try and reduce the cost that they can pass on, particularly to the first home buyer. So that's the thrust of a lot of what we did. Consistency, we mentioned that early on. Land development process, to be truthful, zoning and structure plan, and it says here, that's when you technocrats have got to get involved. Don't wait till you get the subdivision plan. That's a cadastral plan. It's already been to the state. It's already been approved. It's done. How many of you have turned around and said, hey, can't fit a roundabout in? I'll tell you why, because you didn't consider at this stage which were going to be your arterial roads and your district distributor ways and so on. So, and then your clearance, and that's a beauty. You know how you all tick the box and you sign off and you say, yeah, we've cleared it. No, you haven't. There's only one clearance authority in the state, and that's the WAPC. All you've done is said to them, we think they've done what they were supposed to have done. And that's where they're at. So our consultants overview, I'll run through very quickly. It needed to be upgraded. Legislation had changed, and we've been through that. Policy documents, livable neighbourhoods. How many in here hate it? Yeah, great, there's only one problem. State government's approved it as a policy, so learn it. Now, the reason you hate it, and I'll argue with you later, that's why I won't be here at morning tea, you haven't read it. You've read the bits you want to read. Read it from front cover to back cover, and guess what? All your standards apply. All the criteria that used to apply still apply, except you've got to prove it. Biggest one, truncations on corners. Don't need them. and you don't. 2 cars travelling at 30k don't need a truncation on 2 14-metre road reserves. Check it out. Go and do your Austroads calculation. Lift the speed limit, and yes, you do need them. And that's all it says in livable neighbourhoods. Check your Austroads, prove your calcs and say, I need a 4x4 or a 6x6 or a 3x3, and it'll be given to you. There's not a problem, but you've got to do the work, just a little bit of work. Innovations and materials, as we would all say, and drainage is probably going to be the biggest innovation that's coming up. Water sensitive urban design. Don't we all love it? I've got a nice little catchphrase for you at the end, but, and then I'll run. You've had asphalt, stone mastic asphalt, and so on over a period of time. We structured the modules such that they've got a general part, policies and standard, the design, materials and specifications. That runs consistently through the document. And here's module number 4, drainage. The ones that we picked up were Stormwater Management Manual, Better Urban Water Design and Livable Neighbourhoods, because those 3, if you put them together, will generally give you a very, very good basis of designing drainage. Livable Neighbourhoods is element 5. You've got water sensitive urban design. This one, and I'm assuming Bill Till will talk a lot about that, is water quality. That is into our water bodies, our groundwater, and so on. I know Jim Davies did a lot of work for the western suburbs on water going to the ocean and so on, and he may allude to that. I'm going to highlight later water quantity. Now, you can look in the eastern states and say, well, why would we bother? But that's to do with the Department of Water. Those of you that want to get into flood mitigation and that, don't go and talk to the Department of Water. They've got 3 guys in there to do nothing else. And they look at all the risks. And if you go through Australian rainfall and runoff and you look at flood mitigation, it's about that thick. And I'm not smart enough to go through it, I'll tell you now. Nuisance insect management, flood protection, that's flood, not stormwater. There's two different things. A storm recurrence gives you so much water. A flood is when it rains and rains and rains, and then all of a sudden what was up the catchment comes down the catchment and we end up with the flood. Groundwater drainage, wouldn't see you doing a lot with that. Stormwater infiltration, yes, you'll be looking at that because that's part of water sensitive urban design, and flood storage. Standards and policies, that manual, I'm not going to go into it, you can actually see it online. Same with Better Water. Most of this has come from the Commission and the Department of Water, and Livable Neighbourhoods. So they're the 3. I have no intention of trying to go through those in a 20-minute talk. Here's your basic objectives in local government, and I would suggest that the contracting fraternity also need to sit and look at this diagram. You've got your general policies, which we're alluding to. You've got a set of tools that you can use. Education, and I think there's going to be more and more of it. I think conferences like this and stormwater streams. Those of you that are up the back, there are seats down the front if you want to come down. So there is a chance there. Those of you that are CP engines, these sort of things keep your qualification up. So there is new performance information, cost information, statutory tools, scheme provisions, which is where they're suggesting most of our stormwater requirements should be put into our structure plans and schemes. I think there's ways of talking to developers and saying, guys, if you do A, B and C, you'll get something out of it, and so on. And then there's your guidelines. So you probably need to have a look at that. The principle is post-development discharge should be maintained at the pre-development conditions. Now, if that happens, you don't have to do a lot. Now, anybody knows if you've got a bare land and you've got bush in that and you go and clear it all, the coefficient of runoff changes pretty bad. You put roads in and all of a sudden certain of those areas are 95% runoff. Bang. There's no way in the world you're going to be able to make the post-development such that it equals pre-development and then not have to do anything. So I think that's one of the conditions, the principles you need to look at. And you're looking at protecting your built environment from flooding and waterlogging and minimise public risk. I've had an occasion, I'm currently working at a local authority, a 20-year storm went through probably about 2 months ago. And a guy got flooded and somebody said, but he built in the bottom of the hill. What's he expect? I mean, has anybody got a subdivisional condition that says if you buy the block at the bottom of the hill, you're a drainage sump? Because the drainage sump, surprisingly enough, straight across the road from him. Send us in 1986 photographs, probably should have whacked one in here, of a bloke rowing a canoe up his street. Meanwhile, his house has got 300 to 400 mil of water in it. He's now put in the insurance claim and the local authority is going to pay. There's no question, because when you see the catchment size, somebody didn't get it right. He's got the gullies at the bottom and the catchment is, I don't know, 52 hectares or something. Now, if you use just a little bit of common sense, you'll realise that there's no way in the world 2 gullies at the bottom of the hill is going to take that water in and get it across. By the time it's just not going to work. So you've got to look at how you do that. Water quality, maintain surface and groundwater quality at pre-development levels. And if possible, improve it. Now, some of the thought is, if we've got our massive drainage systems, is to do storage up the catchment, see if you can get it into an aquifer and stop it getting to the end. And to give you an example, you know, they like big stripping ponds, nutrient stripping ponds. The Bayswater main drain, we're going back probably 20 years, had 6% of all the nutrients into the Swan River coming out of the Bayswater main drain. And our environmental people, and we informed the Bayswater Integrated Catchment Management Group, and I come up with this magic idea, we're going to have a nutrient stripping pond at Riverside Gardens before it goes in the 4.5 hectares. There was no Riverside Gardens when they'd finished with the nutrient stripping pond. No way the council was going to entertain that. So we've gone back, looked at living streams, put things up the system, changed water from going one way to another and storing and cleansing water. And guess what? If I'm correct, we're down around about 1.3% into the river now. Now, it may have taken 20 years to do, but that was the alternative. But you've got to have a look at seeing if you can improve it. Disease vector, what that's about is health risks from mosquitoes when you have retention and detention basing. And I got an education last week, the Peel Inlet, and they showed us all this mosquito breeding, and I was one of these idiots that thought 150 mil, warms up, mozzies, bang. So if we keep the water deep, it's okay. They showed us water like this, reeking with mosquito larvae, and I didn't think that happened. So you need to be pretty careful with that. Obviously, the November and May detained mobile water is fully infiltrated. In other words, after you hit November, we prefer you to have no water laying around, unless it's in a lake or a river. You don't need to have areas where there's little bits of water laying around all over the place. So they wanted 96 hours divided by 24, what's about 4 days, roughly. So that's what they're looking at. Planning an integrated cycle. Consideration of water issues must be integrated with other planning and development. And that can include major shopping centres, major industrial areas and so on. You're looking at how you can dispose of that water without sticking it in a pipe and taking it faster than it used to make it to the water body. That's the thing you need to remember with pipe drainage, that you may have runoff and have had it for decades, but as soon as you stick it in a pipe, it's now travelling way faster than it ever did before. Therefore, it gets to the end a lot quicker, and that is one of the reasons you can cause flooding downstream. Key elements of your water-sensitive urban design. I better just keep a check on here. I'm just about done. 2 minutes. I better get to that. Flood protection. You can actually get these straight out of the manual. Okay, I've done that. They want a 1 in 1 year storm goes into your rain gardens, and above that, then it goes into a pipe system. So if that water's reduced, that means your pipe system's reduced. The only question I have is what happens when you don't get. I think everybody designed residential 5 years and commercial 10-year recurrent storms. What happens when you get the 20-year storm? None of it's going to work. So then you need to look at overland stormwater design, groundwater drainage design, urban areas, and I mean this is not rocket science, you'll all know this. Water sensitive urban design, you've got graded gully side entry pits, you've got junction pits, subsoil drainage, these are all in this section 4, primary and distributor roads, and there's a factor on there about the width of water in a gully, in a curb line. On major roads, you don't want traffic travelling at 70, 80, 90k and they're ploughing through 3.5 metres of water. Generally a metre is it. So if you look at a car at 2.5 metres wide, you've got a 3.5 metre lane, you've got a metre of water, you've still got enough surface of the road for the car to run on. Access flood storage detention facilities, I think they're pretty straightforward, and stormwater infiltration. That's a bit of a science because you've got to look at the permeability of your soil, what your inflow is, what your outflow is, and then you've got to have basins that take into account to hold that water for a certain amount of time while it infiltrates and the rest comes in. Yeah, okay, I'll get to the rural. Now this is interesting. We put rural crossover culverts, flood storage and detention areas. Guess what? They operate in the urban area as well. Anybody not got half the Water Corp's open drains in their area? Standard drainage criteria. And this is where, and I understand talking to Mr Davies this morning, he's going to talk about it as well. Terrific to produce your rain gardens, terrific to do your water sensitive urban design, terrific. But if your hydraulic grade line pops out of the ground, those of you designing drainage know the drainage system doesn't work. So whilst you can talk about water quality, and we're going to clean it, I've seen, a particular bubble up system I'm talking about is 100 millimetres below the adjacent road, and the pipe system is about 80 metres from the gullies over there getting into this system here. You can guess what happens to the road. 300 mil of water in it. Why? Because 100 mil of head loss in pipes and overland flow is nothing. So we are now going to spend 80 grand to take half the water somewhere else. So when you're looking at these innovative things, don't throw out the window your previous standards, because and you'll get it a lot more from Jim later, I understand, there's a quantity of water that's going to come to low points whether you like it or not. And you can do all the fancy stuff about cleaning it, but for God's sake, get the levels right. If this design had been done and they deepened the swale, got it down below the outlet that was originally there, they might have had the estuary flowing back into it, but it doesn't matter. The point is that water body is low enough hydraulically to allow all the water to at least get there and be part of the system. So please, when you're designing, don't throw this stuff out with the bath water. Don't forget to apply good drainage calculations to all designs. Where are we at? March 2011, those of you that came to the workshop in this very room produced a massive requests and submissions. They were all considered to a committee that we went through before, that Martin Glover, who is now the ex Vice President, he chaired. We had industry on there the lot. They said some of them went in, they said some of them will wait, and they said some of them are not going in. And we just got to put up with that. Now, the WAPC intended to make this a policy. That's the state's policy. They advertised it, and as part of the process, there were submissions. Those submissions have been considered, and the appropriate ones are being put into the new version. So I can't tell you what they are, and I can't tell you what the new version will be, but it's coming out. They've been considered by the committee. Meeting was held, some of you attended the City of Canning with the people that had made submissions. They were setting up a committee of those people to allow them to have further input and discussion. That just supplies us with more information. Nobody's got a majority on innovation and thinking, so some of those things there, we may pick up something else. The latest revision is out. Now, this was the concerning thing that I've only just realised. IPWEA are concerned that if it goes out as a policy, it becomes like a legal document, when in fact it was meant to be an engineering assister, for the want of a better word. People could pick it up and sort of have a look at that. Yeah, I've got a couple more to go and I'm finished. But that's quite disturbing. Now, the Director General of Planning, having heard our concern, went and got an independent engineer to look at it, and he said the same thing. He thinks it should stay as a generic document to assist people. It will be used at SAT, but it won't have the teeth that it will have if it becomes an official policy adopted by WAPC. My personal opinion, and nobody else's, I'm very disappointed, because I really didn't want to see it be a document that was used extensively. It's in a state of flux. The decision on its role hasn't been made. I'm not sure when it will be made. And I would hope that there's not another version to be done, because I'm the immediate past president, and in July I should do version 3. Now, I think version 2.2 has just been done and finalised. I think it would be crazy to start another one in sort of 3 or 4 months' time. I was going to answer questions, but I think we've run out of time.